I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. The view is incredible.
Not as incredible as you.
You're quite the charmer.
Only for you.
Nobody warned Amara Obese that the man sitting across from her at table 9 had once made a South Korean crime lord weep simply by exhaling. Nobody warned Park Jae-won either that the woman walking toward him in that burnt orange dress was about to do something far more dangerous than anything he'd survived in 15 years of running Seoul's most feared underground empire. She was going to make him feel something. The restaurant was called Bistro Sarin, and it had the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were either falling in love or confessing to something. Soft amber glow, linen tablecloths, so white they seemed to be judging you, and a pianist in the corner playing jazz with the calm authority of a man who had long ago accepted that nobody was really listening. It was a Thursday evening in August, and Seoul was doing what Seoul does in August, pressing its full, humid weight against every person foolish enough to exist outdoors. Park Jae-won was not outdoors. He was at table 9, sitting with the composed stillness of a man who had turned stillness into a weapon. Charcoal suit, no tie, a rare concession to the heat that his tailor had practically begged for. A single glass of sparkling water in front of him, untouched, because touching it would mean deciding something, and Jae-won had not yet decided whether he was staying. He was 38 years old. He had negotiated with Yakuza lieutenants, outmaneuvered 3 separate government investigations, and once settled a territorial dispute in Incheon using nothing but a folder of photographs and a very long silence. He ran the Champa circle, not that anyone said that name above a whisper, and he did not, under any circumstances, get set up on blind dates. And yet, here he was. The whole thing was Tae-sung's fault. Tae-sung, his best friend, his most trusted lieutenant, and arguably the only person on Earth Jae-won would take a bullet for, though lately he was reconsidering the terms of that arrangement. Tae-sung had called it a simple dinner with a friend of a friend. He'd said it casually, the way he said everything, with that grin that had fooled politicians and policemen alike. Jae-won had agreed because it was Thursday, because his schedule had a gap, and because his mother had spent the previous Sunday dinner listing, in chronological order, every personal failure of his adult life, and agreeing to one dinner felt like cheaper therapy than whatever came next. He had not been told the dinner was a setup. He had not been told there would be a woman. He had certainly not been told that woman would be, and he was still processing this. Nigerian-American, a food blogger with 340,000 subscribers, and apparently someone who reviewed restaurants the way forensic investigators reviewed crime scenes, methodically, mercilessly, and with a vocabulary that left no survivors. He knew all of this because Tae-sung, in a moment of either guilt or cowardice, had texted him a panicked briefing note 11 minutes before she arrived. 11 minutes. The man once had 6 hours to plan a warehouse extraction and called it plenty of time. 11 minutes for this. Jae-won had read the note twice, put his phone face down on the table, and decided that whatever happened tonight, Tae-sung was reorganizing every storage facility in Gyeonggi province by hand. He heard her before he saw her, not loudly, but the way a room changes when something significant enters it. A slight reorientation of attention. The pianist glanced up. A waiter adjusted his trajectory. Jae-won, who noticed everything, noticed all of this before he turned. Amara Obese was not what he expected. He wasn't entirely sure what he had expected. His imagination, under pressure and with 11 minutes' notice, had not produced anything particularly generous. But it was not this. She was tall, full-figured in the kind of way that moved with her rather than against her, wearing a burnt orange wrap dress that seemed to have been specifically designed to make the restaurant's amber lighting feel inadequate. Her locks were swept up with a gold clip, 2 loose ones falling across her forehead with a freedom the rest of her face did not yet share. Her face, as she spotted him, was doing the careful thing. The "I have been here before, and I know exactly how this ends" thing. Jae-won recognized it. He'd worn that same expression to every meeting in the last 5 years. Let's skip the part where we pretend this wasn't a setup and get to the part where we agree on an exit strategy. Park Jae-won said nothing. And for the first time in recent memory, the silence was not his. There is a specific kind of silence that follows when someone says exactly the right wrong thing at exactly the right wrong moment. It isn't empty. It has texture, the kind you could run your fingers across and feel the grain of. That was the silence that settled over table 9 after Amara spoke, and it lasted exactly 4 seconds, which in Park Jae-won's world was long enough to end careers. Then he picked up his sparkling water, took one measured sip, set it down, and said, "The exit is behind you. Past the pianist. Turn left at the coat stand." Amara blinked. Then, against what was clearly her better judgment, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like her face acknowledging that something unexpected had occurred and filing a report about it. "You actually know where the exit is," she said. "I always know where the exit is." That's either very professional or deeply concerning. Frequently both. She studied him for a moment the way she studied menus, not reading for pleasure, but assessing for risk. Then she picked up her own menu, opened it, and said nothing further. Which meant, Jae-won understood, that round one was a draw. In his experience, draws were rarer and more interesting than victories. The waiter appeared, young, eager, with the nervous energy of someone who had been briefed that table 9's occupant was important without being told exactly why, which meant his imagination had filled in the blanks badly. He was smiling too hard and standing too straight. Amara ordered the oxtail without opening the menu again, and asked the kitchen, she added, pleasantly, whether the braising liquid is wine-based or stock-based. "It matters." The waiter blinked. "Oh yes, of course. Thank you." She smiled at him. Genuinely, warmly, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with performance, and the waiter visibly relaxed 3 inches. Jae-won watched this and ordered mineral water. Still, the waiter left looking like he'd survived something. "You do that on purpose," Jae-won said. "Do what?" "Make people feel seen." The waiter. Amara set her menu down. "I asked about braising liquid." You smiled at him like he was a person rather than a function. In a restaurant like this, at a table like this, most people don't bother. A beat. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a recalibration. She was revising something about him, and she wasn't trying to hide the fact that she was doing it. "Most people at tables like this," she said carefully, "don't notice waiters at all. I notice everything." Is that a skill or a curse? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Tuesday to Saturday, skill. Sundays, curse. She laughed, short, surprised, genuine. The kind that escapes before the filter catches it. Then she looked mildly annoyed at herself, which Jae-won found, to his own confusion, charming. The evening proceeded. Not smoothly. Nothing about these two people in this particular room on this particular evening was going to produce smooth. But with the strange, crackling energy of two people who had both arrived expecting to be bored and were now mutually, privately unsettled by the fact that they weren't. She told him about her channel. Not boasting, just explaining, the way you explain something you love to someone who asked sincerely. She'd started it 4 years ago, filming herself cooking in a studio apartment the size of a generous thought, and it had grown into something real. 340,000 subscribers. Brand partnerships she actually believed in. A comment section that functioned, remarkably, like a community rather than a landfill. "What made you stay in Seoul?" he asked. She paused, turning her water glass slowly. "Stubbornness, mostly. I came on a scholarship, struggled for about a year, almost went home twice. And then one morning I woke up and my Korean was good enough to argue with my landlord and win. After that it felt like leaving would be letting him have the last word." Jae-won looked at her. "You stayed in a country out of spite toward your landlord." He was a very irritating man. "That," Jae-won said, with something that was almost admiration, "is the most Champa thing I have ever heard a civilian say." Amara narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" He picked up his water. "It means you would have survived my world." The words landed quietly, but they landed deep, and in the amber light of Bistro Sarin, something passed between them that neither of them had names for yet. Something that felt, uncomfortably and undeniably, like the very beginning of something neither of them had agreed to. The oxtail arrived, and Amara did what Amara always did when food was placed in front of her. She stopped being polite and started being honest. She leaned forward, examined the plate with the focused intensity of a cardiologist reading a scan, lifted her fork, took one precise bite, chewed slowly, and closed her eyes. Jae-won watched all of this without speaking. He had learned, in the last 40 minutes, that interrupting Amara Osei in a moment of genuine concentration was probably in the same category of poor decisions as unannounced visits and unsigned contracts. She opened her eyes. Wine-based. Good acidity. They let it go at least 3 hours. A pause. They under-season the finishing salt, but the bone marrow integration is actually excellent, so I'll forgive them. You'll forgive them, J1 repeated. I have a platform. Forgiveness is a resource I allocate carefully. He looked at her for a long moment. In 15 years of running an organization built on leverage, information, and the precise application of consequence, he had never once considered that a food blogger and a crime boss might share a fundamental philosophy. He was finding this evening deeply inconvenient. His own plate, a seared sea base he had ordered mostly to have something in front of him, sat largely undisturbed. He ate like he did everything else, efficiently and without ceremony. Food, for most of his adult life, had been fuel. Watching Amara treat it as something close to sacred produced in him a feeling he couldn't immediately classify. It was somewhere between envy and education. You never just eat, she said, watching him now. You consume. There's a difference. I eat. You process nutrition with the emotional engagement of a vending machine. She said it without cruelty, just observation, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. This is what I see, not what I think of you. When's the last time you ate something and actually thought about how it tasted? He opened his mouth, closed it. That's what I thought, she said, and speared another piece of oxtail. This was the moment. J1 would think about it later, in the quiet of his apartment, with a glass of whiskey and the uncomfortable leisure of retrospect. This was the moment the evening changed temperature. Not dramatically, not with music swelling or lightning splitting the sky, just a quiet, internal shift, like a door that had been stuck for years turning on its hinge. Because nobody asked Park J1 questions like that. Not his mother, who was too busy cataloging his failures. Not Tae-sung, who was too busy surviving him. Not the men who worked for him, who were far too busy being afraid of him. Nobody asked him when's the last time you tasted something and waited, genuinely, for an answer. My grandmother's doenjang jjigae, he said finally. I was 11. She made it on the first cold day of every November. I haven't tasted it since because nobody else makes it the same way and I stopped trying to find a version that didn't disappoint me. Silence. Amara put her fork down. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully decode. Not pity, not sympathy exactly. Something quieter and more considered than either. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who understood the specific grief of a taste you couldn't recover. I know that feeling, she said softly. My grandmother's groundnut soup. I've been chasing it for 10 years. I've made it 600 times, and it's never quite right. A small pause. She passed 4 years ago. I think the missing ingredient was just her. The pianist in the corner shifted into something slower. The restaurant hummed around them, indifferent and golden. J1 said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm sorry about your grandmother. I'm sorry about yours. She's not dead. I know, but you lost her cooking at 11, and that's its own kind of grief. Now, right here, before this story goes further, ask yourself something. Tae-sung and Ji-yeon set these two people up without consent, without warning, and without regard for either of them. They treated two human beings like pieces to be moved on a board. We've all met people like that. People who believe that good intentions cancel out the damage of control. Do you think manipulation is ever justified if the outcome is beautiful? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe people deserve honesty, not orchestration, hit that subscribe button. Only the Tae-sungs of this world would disagree. J1 looked at her across the table. This woman who had arrived as an inconvenience and was rapidly becoming something his carefully organized life had no existing folder for, and said, very quietly, "You're not what I expected." Amara picked her fork back up. "Nobody ever is," she said. "That's rather the whole point of showing up." The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. J1 felt it before he heard it. A specific vibration pattern he had programmed for specific people, the kind of pattern that meant now, not when you're free, not at your convenience, but now, with all the warmth and patience of a building on fire. He glanced at the screen. One word for the contact name. Sue, his second in command. The man did not call during off hours unless the alternative was calling a coroner. He looked up at Amara. Excuse me. One moment. She gestured with her fork. Go ahead, with the ease of someone who had long ago stopped taking it personally when the world interrupted dinner. He stepped away from the table, walked to the narrow corridor near the kitchen entrance, and answered. The conversation lasted 89 seconds. He counted, not deliberately, just the way a man counts when counting is the only thing keeping the temperature of his expression controlled. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He received 2 answers that he did not like. He said, handle the perimeter. Nothing moves until I'm there. And ended the call. He stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. Somewhere across the restaurant, the pianist had moved into a Chet Baker piece that had no business being that melancholy on a Thursday. J1 straightened his jacket, reset his face to its default, composed, unreadable, the human equivalent of a locked room, and walked back to table 9. He sat down. Amara was watching him the way she'd watched her oxtail, not intrusively, but with that same quiet, calibrated attention that noticed everything and judged selectively. She said nothing. She waited. And that, the waiting, the not asking, the giving of space without making a performance of generosity, undid something small and structural inside him. An issue, he said, with work. Is it serious? A pause. In his world, the honest answer to that question was yes, significantly, but honest answers about his world were not things he distributed freely. They were things he rationed, like ammunition. He had spent 15 years ensuring that the fewer people knew about the true nature of his work, the fewer people were in danger because of it. It requires attention, he said carefully. I may need to leave earlier than intended. Amara nodded once. No performance of disappointment. No theatrical understanding. Just a nod, clean, dignified, the response of a woman who had learned not to make her feelings a burden for people who hadn't earned the weight of them, which somehow made him feel worse than if she'd been upset. My grandmother, Amara said. Mamacua. She cooked like the food would be offended if she didn't give it her full attention. J1 looked at the photograph for a long moment. At the woman in it, at the joy in her, uncomplicated and enormous, the kind of joy that doesn't perform itself for cameras but gets caught anyway. She looks, he said slowly, like someone who would have had very strong opinions about my sparkling water situation. Amara laughed, that full, unguarded laugh again, the one that escaped before the filter caught it. She would have put a bowl of soup in front of you and stood there until you finished it. No negotiation. I would have finished it. I know, Amara said. And the way she said it, simply, certainly, without elaboration, felt like something being handed to him. Something small and fragile and real. He slid the phone back carefully, like returning something borrowed. Stood, buttoned his jacket with the practiced ease of a man who had dressed for exits as often as for entrances. The braising liquid, he said. Was it worth forgiving them? She looked up at him. Ask me again at the end of the night. I may not be here at the end of the night. Then ask me next time. The assumption of a next time, stated so casually, so without campaign or calculation, hit him somewhere between the second and third rib. He held it there, behind his composed face and his locked room expression, and said, Next time, I'll eat something. Next time, Amara replied, picking up her fork, I'll order you the oxtail myself. He nodded once, turned, walked toward the exit, past the pianist, left at the coat stand, exactly where he'd said it was, and did not look back. He wanted to. That was the problem. Tae-sung was waiting outside. Not subtly. Not with any of the tradecraft that 15 years of working for Park J1 should have instilled in a man by osmosis alone. He was standing on the pavement across from Bistro Sarin in a bucket hat that was doing absolutely nothing. Not for his disguise, not for his appearance, not for the broader cause of hats as a concept, pretending to read a restaurant review on his phone with the convincing energy of a golden retriever pretending to understand chess. Beside him, Ji-yun, Amara's best friend, the other architect of this entire catastrophe, was examining a potted plant near the restaurant entrance with the focused intensity of a woman who had decided that botany was her alibi. She was crouched slightly, head tilted, one finger extended toward a leaf, as though she had spent years waiting for the opportunity to assess this specific ficus on this specific Thursday evening. J1 stopped on the pavement, looked at Tae-sung, then at Ji-yun, then back at Tae-sung. Tae-sung's phone slowly lowered. His grin appeared, the one that had, over the years, preceded some of the most catastrophically optimistic decisions in Champa Circle history. It was the grin of a man who knew he was in trouble and had decided that charm was load-bearing infrastructure. "How was dinner?" Tae-sung asked, with the casual brightness of someone who had not spent the last 2 hours crouching behind metaphorical bushes. "You're reassigned," Jae-won said. "Every storage facility in Gyeonggi Province. Inventory audit. By hand. Starting Monday." Tae-sung's grin flickered but held. "So good, then." Jae-won walked past him without another word, toward the car that Sue had sent, black, unmarked, idling at the corner with the patient menace of all things in Jae-won's life that existed to move him efficiently toward problems. He got in. The door closed. The car pulled away. And in the back seat, in the dark and the quiet and the motion, Park Jae-won did something he almost never did voluntarily. He sat with a feeling. It was uncomfortable. Feelings, in his experience, were structurally unsound. They shifted weight unexpectedly, compromised load-bearing walls, introduced variables that no spreadsheet or surveillance report could account for. He had spent the better part of his adult life building a world in which feelings were managed rather than experienced, routed around rather than walked through. But this one wouldn't route. It sat in the center of his chest like that Chet Baker piano piece, slow, unresolved, melancholy in a way that was somehow also not entirely unpleasant. "Next time, I'll order you the oxtail myself." He looked out the window at Seoul sliding past, the lights, the noise, the city's relentless, neon-drenched insistence on existing at full volume, and thought about a woman who stayed in a country out of spite toward her landlord, who forgave restaurants as a resource allocation, who kept chasing her grandmother's recipe knowing she'd never quite find it, and kept cooking anyway, who had shown him a photograph like a gift and not asked for anything in return. Meanwhile, back on the pavement outside, Ji-yun had abandoned the ficus the moment Jae-won's car disappeared around the corner and materialized at Amara's elbow with the speed and enthusiasm of someone who had been holding their breath for 2 hours. "Well," Ji-yun demanded. Amara looked at her, slowly, with the measured, deliberate energy of a woman composing her response the way a prosecutor composes an opening statement. "You," Amara said, "set me up. Without telling me. With a man you described as, and I'm quoting directly from your text, a friend of Tae-sung's who works in finance." Ji-yun had the decency to wince. "Finance is broadly accurate." Ji-yun. "He manages assets." Ji-yun. "Very significant assets." "The man runs a criminal organization. He runs several legitimate businesses as well, and I think you're focusing on." "I'm focusing," Amara said calmly, "on the fact that you sent me on a blind date with a man whose LinkedIn profile would get him arrested." Ji-yun grabbed both of Amara's hands with the desperate grip of someone who had invested emotionally in an outcome and refused to let data change the projection. "But how was it?" Amara looked at her friend, at Ji-yun's wide, hopeful, entirely unrepentant eyes, and felt the complicated arithmetic of the evening attempting to resolve itself in her chest. "The sparkling water. The exit behind you past the pianist. You would have survived my world." The photograph of Mame Acua, returned carefully, like something borrowed. "Next time I'll eat something." She pulled her hands free, straightened her wrap dress, picked up her clutch. "He knew where every exit in that restaurant was," she said finally, and started walking. Ji-yun scurried after her. "Is that good or bad?" Amara considered the question for the length of half a block. "I haven't decided yet," she said. But her face, turned slightly away from Ji-yun and toward the night-warm Seoul street, was doing something that hadn't happened in a very long time. It was hoping. The second date was not called a second date. Jae-won texted, not called, texted, which Tae-sung later described as the most emotionally significant thing I have witnessed him do since 2019. Exactly 4 days after Bistro Saren. The message was characteristically minimal. "There is a restaurant in Mapo-gu. Thursday, 7 o'clock. The oxtail is reportedly acceptable. No question mark. No emoji. No if you're free or would you like to or any of the linguistic cushioning that most humans instinctively wrap around vulnerability." Amara stared at the message for a long time. Then she screenshotted it, sent it to Ji-yun with the caption "This man," and replied, "I'll be the judge of the oxtail." She arrived Thursday at 7. He was already there. He had, she noticed, ordered sparkling water again. But this time there was a second glass on the table. Still water. For her. He had remembered, from one dinner, that she drank still. She sat down, looked at the still water, looked at him. He said nothing, just opened his menu with the composure of a man who had absolutely not spent any portion of the last 4 days thinking about this moment. You remembered, she said. I noticed things. You remembered what I drink. Still water. No lemon. You pushed the lemon slice to the side of the glass at Bistro Sarin within 4 seconds of it arriving. Amara put her menu down. That is either very attentive or mildly alarming. Frequently both. And just like that, with the echo of their first evening's language, the small callback that neither of them acknowledged but both of them felt, something settled. Not the nervous, crackling energy of two strangers performing ease. Something warmer, more dangerous. The comfort of a conversation that had simply continued rather than started again. The restaurant in Mapo Gu was smaller than Bistro Sarin, less performative, the kind of place that had been in the same family for 3 generations and didn't need ambient lighting to make a point because the food made the point. J1 had chosen it carefully, though he would not have described it as careful, would have said instead efficient or logical, because it was the kind of place where nobody would recognize him from either direction. Not the society pages, and not the other kind of pages. He ordered the oxtail. She looked across the table at him, at the charcoal suit, slightly less formal tonight, the top button of his shirt open in a concession so small it was almost invisible, and felt something warm move through her that she immediately attempted to organize into something more manageable. The evening deepened. They talked, really talked, the kind that happens when 2 people have silently agreed to stop auditioning for each other and just be in the same room. He told her about growing up in Busan, about a father who was present in body and entirely absent in every way that mattered, about being 17 and deciding that if the world was going to be indifferent to him, he would build something it couldn't ignore. She told him about arriving in Seoul at 22 with 2 suitcases, a scholarship, and the absolute certainty that she would fail, and the equally absolute certainty that she would not let that stop her. About the 6 months of instant noodles. About filming her first video in a bathroom because the light was better and watching it get 400 views in a week and crying at her laptop like those 400 people had personally shown up at her door. 400 felt like millions, she said. Because it was proof, he said, that the thing you made was real enough to reach people. She looked at him. Yes, exactly that. He had understood it. Immediately, completely. In the way that people who have built things from nothing understand the specific electricity of first proof. She hadn't expected that from him. She was finding, with increasing frequency, things she hadn't expected from him. The oxtail arrived. He looked at it, then at her. Instruct me, he said. She blinked. What? You're the authority. Tell me what I'm supposed to be tasting. Amara looked at Park J1. This closed, controlled, deeply alarming man who moved through the world like a weather system with good tailoring, asking her, genuinely, to teach him how to taste something, to be present in his own mouth, to stop consuming and start experiencing. Something cracked open in her chest, not loudly, just the way dawn happens, not all at once, but suddenly, irreversibly there. Start with the sauce, she said softly. Just the sauce, before anything else. He did. He lifted his spoon, tasted, said nothing for a moment. Then, it needs more time. The collagen hasn't fully broken down. Amara stared at him. What, he said. You just critiqued braising technique. You said the bone marrow integration mattered. I was listening. She laughed, that full, helpless, unguarded laugh, and this time she didn't look annoyed at herself afterward. This time, she let it stay on her face. And J1, watching her laugh in the warm light of a family restaurant in Mapo Gu, felt something he had no existing infrastructure for and no immediate plan to manage. He felt, quietly and completely, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It happened on their 5th evening together. Not a restaurant this time. Amara's studio, the one she filmed in, cooked in, built everything she had in. A warm, cluttered, gloriously alive space in Yongsan that smelled of cumin and sesame oil and the particular productive chaos of someone who took their work seriously enough to let it live everywhere. Shelves of spices organized by region, not alphabetically, because geography mattered. A filming setup in the corner with a ring light that had survived 3 apartment moves and 1 minor kitchen fire. Pots hanging from a ceiling rack like a percussion section waiting for the conductor. J1 stood in the middle of it looking like a man who had walked into a different dimension, which, in a sense, he had. His world was controlled surfaces and clean lines and rooms that communicated power through deliberate emptiness. This room communicated something else entirely. It communicated life, full, unapologetic, overflowing life, and it unsettled him in the best possible way. "Sit," Amara said, tying her apron. "And before you ask, no, you cannot reorganize my spice shelf. I know it looks chaotic. It isn't. I wasn't going to say anything. You were looking at it. I look at everything. Not everything needs restructuring." J1. His name in her mouth. She'd started using it 3 evenings ago. Not Mr. Park, not the careful neutrality of a woman keeping distance, but J1, with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had decided the distance wasn't worth maintaining. Each time she said it, he felt it land somewhere specific and undefended. She was making groundnut soup. She had told him 2 days ago, very casually, over a text conversation that had somehow lasted 4 hours. "I'm going to try Mame Acua's recipe again on Thursday. Come if you want." And he had responded, with characteristic efficiency, "I'll be there at 6. And then, after a pause, that Tae-sung, who had been sitting across from him at the time and had watched the entire exchange with barely concealed emotional investment, would later describe as the longest 30 seconds of my professional life. He had added, "Tell me what to bring." She had told him to bring a good palm oil. He had shown up with 3 different varieties from 3 different regions, because Park J1 did not do things by half measures, and because he had spent 40 minutes researching palm oil provenance, which was not a sentence he had ever previously imagined applying to himself. Now he sat on a stool at her kitchen counter and watched her cook. Not passively, she narrated. Not for the camera, which was off tonight, but for him. Telling him why she was adding the crayfish at this stage and not later. Why her grandmother always used a wooden spoon and never a metal one. Why the pepper had to be hand ground, not blended, because the texture was part of the conversation the soup was having with whoever ate it. He listened the way he'd listened that first evening, not politely, but actually, leaning slightly forward, asking precise, genuine questions that told her he was tracking every word. And then the soup was ready. She ladled it into 2 bowls, set one in front of him, sat across the counter, and for a moment they just looked at it, at the deep, rust-red surface, the oil catching the kitchen light, the steam rising with the patience of something that had been waited for. "Is it her recipe?" he asked. "Close," Amara said, and her voice did the thing it always did when she talked about Mame Acua, went quieter, warmer, the way a room feels when someone lights a candle instead of the overhead light. "Closer than I've ever gotten." "What's different?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think I stopped being afraid of it. Stopped treating it like a test I could fail. Started just cooking it. For someone." A pause. She looked up at him. "For you, actually." Something moved across J1's face. Not the controlled, managed expressions he wore like a second suit, but something underneath. Something that had been pressing against the locked room door for 5 evenings and had finally, quietly, been let through. He picked up his spoon, tasted the soup, and Park J1, the man who had not tasted anything in 27 years that reached the place food was supposed to reach, felt his eyes go bright. Not dramatically, not with the performance of a man having a moment. Just his eyes going bright. The way stars don't turn on, but simply become visible when the sky finally gets dark enough. Amara saw it. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He set his spoon down carefully, looked at her across the counter, across the cluttered, glorious, overflowing life of her kitchen, and said, in a voice that had lost every layer of management and control, "It tastes like November." She understood immediately. Dunjang Jigi. First cold day. 11 years old. A grandmother who was still alive and a version of him that still knew how to receive warmth without bracing against it. Her eyes filled, not from sadness, from the particular, overwhelming emotion of being witnessed, of having the thing you made reach exactly where it was supposed to reach, in exactly the person you'd made it for. One tear. She caught it quickly, the way she caught her unguarded laughs. Fast, slightly embarrassed. But not fast enough. He reached across the counter. Didn't take her hand, just placed his beside hers. Close enough to be a choice. Far enough to be a question. She turned her hand over. He covered it with his. Outside, Seoul continued its relentless, neon-soaked insistence on existing at full volume. Somewhere across the city, Taesung was presumably conducting a full inventory audit of a storage facility in a warm, spice-scented studio in Yongsan. A man who had built his entire world around control had finally, willingly, let something in. A woman who had been chasing a recipe for 4 years had finally, not found it, exactly, but understood that the missing ingredient had never been a measurement or a technique. It had been someone worth cooking for. J1 squeezed her hand once, small, certain, the kind of gesture that contains a full sentence. Amara squeezed back. The soup cooled slowly between them, and neither of them moved to eat it yet, because some things are worth sitting with before you consume them. Some things deserve to be felt before they become memory. And this warm, impossible, thoroughly unexpected thing that had begun with an exit strategy and a pianist playing Chet Baker and a woman who stayed in a country out of spite. This was one of them. If you believe that the right person can find you even in the most impossible circumstances, even when someone else pushed you both into the room, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling us, what was the moment in this story that got you? And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that love doesn't always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it arrives 4 days late, in a bucket hat, standing outside a restaurant pretending to read. Only the truly heartless keep this one to themselves.